Hello everyone, welcome to MJ Hobby Corner. This is an MJ Hobby Corner Spotlight. This is a game spotlight, and for those of you that don't know, MJ Game Spotlights are simply my official little videos for covering game rules. And what I do is I generally pick a rule randomly from my game library and then just discuss it and give an overview of what the core mechanics are like, any terrain that I use for it, and miniatures as well. For this game spotlight, I will be covering Reaper Warlord. Since we are going to have a game this weekend, I figure I'll just cover Reaper Warlord. Without further ado, let's get into the book because there's a few things I would like to say. And this is the second edition Reaper Warlord. Okay, so this is the core rulebook. There is another expansion to this, which covers the races of the North, the factions in the North, and that's actually some of my favorite factions are in that book. We will not be covering that book in this particular video. Okay, so all right, without further ado, let's open this up and get into it. All right, so first things first, very nice artwork. It's all black and white artwork, but I really like it. It's very cool. And this is a version of the cover in black and white, but look at that. Very cool. Okay. The book is about 144 pages. One of those pages is the little tables in the back, reference page for gaming. Okay. So, when we first open up the book, we're hit with the map of Taltos. Taltos is the world that Reaper Warlord covers, and we have a few areas here. Plenty of, this is a very general map, so plenty of space to develop your own regions within Taltos. Pretty cool. And then we have some fluff, and the fluff is very well written in this book. I do have to say the fluff is written. It is growing on me. In the past, I've had some issues with the fluff, but as I go more and more in depth into it, it is growing on me. Again, it's very well written. There's nothing wrong with how the fluff is written. And as soon as you go, into the book, the first thing they do is they discuss all the factions from the point of view of a certain character, which they tell you here. And he is a crusader, and he pretty much just discusses all of the factions. So that's pretty cool. It's like fluff within fluff. So if you want to play this game narratively, you can, and that's always great. Look at these faction pictures. I love the Reptus. Okay, the Nefsokar, that's what I will be playing this weekend, and they are very, very cool. Okay, and then you end your fluff section and we jump right into the core rules, okay? So, Reaper Warlord, it runs on what is called the Rage system, and that simply means the Reaper Adventure Game Engine, and or Rage, as it is called. And the idea, that's really not a rule, it's a concept, and the idea is that all Reaper games would run on the Rage system. So all you have to do is really learn one core mechanic, and you can apply it to all the games. All right, so that's interesting. Bases, there is base sizes in this game. Standard base size, cavalry, large, and giant. Those things are important for like line of sight and determining certain things in the game. So base size is important. And they just give you some general rules like base-to-base contact. What happens when a model is over another model? You do get bonuses for height advantage in this game. And then the most important mechanic is what's called the damage track. And I'm bringing the page a little bit closer, the book a little bit closer. And the damage track, or DT, is one of the most important concepts in this book. We're going to see some damage tracks in the stat cards that we look at. And basically what it is a model starts at 0 damage track, which means that the model is in full health. And as you take damage, your damage track will be shifting to the right. And then anything below it, all the stats below it, are your current stats for the damaged model. Okay, we're going to look at that in just a second. It's a very cool mechanic. So as you take damage, your model stats are going to change, and they're either going to get weaker. Sometimes they stay the same. Most of the time they will get weaker as you take more damage. Okay, so it is a very interesting mechanic. There is no pre-measuring in this game, so that's important. And then you have two different kinds of rolls, and that's very important. You have the 10 plus or 10 or better roll, which basically it's a test, and you're going to be using the number 10 or better to determine if it succeeds. And you do have modifiers for that. And then the TV roll. The TV roll, TV stands for target value, and that's a TV or better roll. So basically, you're going to add a stat according to the situation to the roll and any other modifiers. The most common TV or better roll is your combat rolls, okay? Anything having to do with combat, some spell casting and that sort of thing. The most common 10 or better roll is going to be your discipline test, okay? So those are just some rule conventions. That's very important for the core mechanics of the game, so I wanted to talk about that. Now there are rules for terrain, and you have some simple tables which tell you, you know, what happens according to the different terrain types. So like river crossing gives you quarter movement. You know, rough terrain gives you half movement, that sort of thing. And you have simple diagrams of different terrain types. So terrain is important in this game, and that's always nice. You have line of sight rules, and that again goes with base sizes and terrain size, if there's any terrain in the area. So you do have to agree on a couple of little things before the game starts. There are some cool diagrams as well, that black and white diagrams that show you different, you know, give you examples of different things in play. Now, army creation. Army creation is very interesting, and here is an example of the data track. So let's talk a little bit about the data track. So here it is. This model, this example, target damage track 0. Okay, the model's in full health. This column tells you all the stats when the model's in full health. If you take a point of damage, it's going to move to the right to the 1, and then this column now tells you all the stats, right? And then if you take another point of damage, then you're on your final column. If you take more than 3 or more points of damage, in this particular instance, the model's destroyed, okay? So you only have your damage track not only tells you how your model is playing according to that damage, it also tells you its maximum life, hit points basically, okay? All the stats are arranged in little blocks, okay, and that helps to organize things. And one very important thing about this is in leader models, for example, this is a unique captain. These numbers here tell you how many models this leader can have in its troop. Okay, so the minimum here is 4. He can lead 4 to 10 models and then have 1 elite. The number after the line there is the number of elites that leader can command. So it's a very interesting kind of thing. You know, the organization of the stat cards. So these pages will tell you how to set up your army, troop capacities. The troop is the most important unit. So instead of saying like unit, they'll say troop, okay? So troops are your organizations, your basic organization of models for an army, okay? So that's what this game uses, troops. So a troop will have a minimum and a maximum, and some troops are solos, some troops are uniques, and this page describes the leaders. You have 3 different kinds of leaders: sergeants, captains, and warlords. You also have elites, you have soldiers, which are your most common model type, and you have solos, For the solos, they are divided into monsters or solitaire models, okay? And then the final one is the uniques. So out of all those model types, you will be choosing and then arranging them into troops, okay? Whether a solo model is also considered a troop. So very interesting. And again, army creation gives you all those details. You cannot have more than one warlord. An army that has 3 or more leaders needs a warlord. So warlords in small armies are not necessary, okay? But of course, they are one of the best characters because they have the most abilities. They are the strongest. You also have lower ranking leaders like sergeants. So if you want to play a beginner's game, you can use a sergeant as your leader and have a small troop, you know, and that will knock out a lot of the complexity of the game. So we get into game setup, and basically we go into deployment, pre-battle phase. One very important thing about this game is that this game utilizes a deck of cards. Okay, deck of regular playing cards is used to determine initiative, and that's very important. Every troop that you have in your army is going to require 1 card of a particular suit or color, and you choose that. Doesn't matter what it is, but it has to be different from your opponents. And then everybody kind of puts their cards together, you shuffle them up, and you have an initiative deck, okay? So when you pull that card, that particular, if it's your color, then you get to move a troop. Troops, there are no rules stating that they have to stay together, but it's a good idea to keep them together because there are many effects that affect the troop, like spell effects, and you know, beneficial ones that you will need your troops, your models, to be within 5 inches of each other. So I usually try to keep my models within 5 inches of each other whenever they're arranged in a troop. So just wanted to say that. The game term involves just 3 phases: initiative phase, where you draw your card, action phase, and end phase, okay? So simple to the death. There are some victory conditions. You can play to the death if you want, which is you have to destroy one of your, your opponent's army, or you play a standard of 5 game turns. You can have objectives, you can have scenarios, narrative scenarios in this game if you want to. All right, so moving on to actions. Actions are very important, and you have a list of all the different actions that can be performed. They can be performed in any order, okay? The only time things get different where you have to perform things in order is during the combat action, okay? Combat action is subdivided into fight, shoot, and spellcast. Fighting is, of course, melee. So, in the game, you may also get free actions, which some abilities grant you a free action. Every model gets 2 actions. So if you get a free action, that means you're getting a 3rd action, and it will tell you when you can do that action. Okay, so very cool. One example of a very important order is the focus action. Not order, but focus action. The focus action gives you a +1 bonus to combat or to ranged. So that's great, you know. So there's a lot of different little actions here, and some actions can only be performed by the warlords or higher ranking leaders, okay? And things like regroup can be performed by all leaders, including sergeants. You do have specialty actions, which these are generated by special abilities. Those abilities will tell you when you can accomplish those specialty actions. So we go through several pages of actions, including move actions, charge actions, that sort of thing. You get modifiers to melee attack values depending on certain actions, okay? And then this section on page 31 goes over your combat what happens during combat, okay? And it looks very wordy, but it's really not complicated. The combat system works with a target TV roll, okay, TV or better. And as we said, TV means target value. So in this case, the melee attack value is what the attacker will be using, and also include any modifiers. And the defender is going to be using their defensive value, okay? And of course, any modifiers added to that. And so if the attacker equals or better the defensive value of the target, then the attacker does damage. You also take into consideration how many attacks every model has. Models can have multiple attacks. So combat is generally very fast. Once you get used to the rules, combat is very fast and killy. Okay. Another very important thing about combat is when we get over here, models have the chance of defensive strikes, meaning that when you attack your opponent is going to be able to strike you right back, okay? Same thing with ranged attacks. And if we go here, we have all how to do ranged attacks. It's the same exact system. You're only taking into consideration range, right? Range and terrain and line of sight and all that. The cool thing is that even in ranged attack, your opponent, if he has a bow, can strike you back. Not only a bow, but any ranged weapon can actually strike you back. A lot of games don't do that. You know, if you attack them, your opponent has to wait until it's their turn to attack you. Not so in Reaper Warlord. If I attack you with a ranged attack and you have a ranged weapon, you can attack me right back. It's called a defensive strike. Now, certain modifiers and abilities may come into play only during the defensive strike. One very important thing about combat is that damage is calculated after all the combat is over. It is the very last step, okay? And that is because during a defensive strike, an opponent can take you out before anything happens, okay? So, yeah, damage is calculated at the very end. Okay, so firing into melee, it covers all those things. We get to spellcasting, which is very interesting in this game. The spellcasting system is determined through points that you get, spell points, and you also get casting points, which are added to your roll. Spellcasting rolls are of two types. One of them is a 10+ roll, okay, a 10 or better roll, more like a test. Attack spells, on the other hand, use a TV or better roll, okay? So it makes sense because TV rolls are generally reserved for combat, okay? So attack spells. So, yeah, it's interesting. And then your spells are limited by the number of spell points that your spellcaster has. And he has two sets of spell points. One is a number that tells you how many spells he can do right then and there, right? That activation. And then the second number tells you how many spell points he has for the entire game. So, it's an interesting mechanic. Spells have ranges and areas of effect, okay? And here they tell you how to resolve a non-attack spell and how to resolve an attack spell, okay? There are also certain modifiers that occur to the casting points. Remember, you're adding the casting points to the for the 10 or better roll, okay? So for the 10 or better roll, you add your casting points to the roll, and then that gives you a number. And if it beats the 10, if it equals or beats the 10, then the spell is successful. And that's a 10 or better roll. Okay, or it's really a kind of test as opposed to, yeah, it's a kind of test, which is different from an opposed roll, right? So, okay. So model states, these are all the like flying conditions, disabled, blast, burning, anything like that is described here. These are certain states that your models can suddenly come into because of certain effects. And then we get into the special abilities, okay? And there are quite a few special abilities. You have some really badass special abilities. You have special abilities like Spy that allow you to put a initiative card aside and force another card to be drawn. You have abilities like Tactician, which allow you to add an extra card into your initiative deck, okay, in the beginning of the game. So, yeah, it plays on all the mechanics of the game. I really like that. And you have things like Trample and Reach, you know, and a lot of cool special abilities. So there are several pages dedicated to special abilities. Then you have your magic tomes. Now, you have a lot of spells in this game. When you choose a spellcaster, they're associated with a tome, and each tome has a list of spells. You're able to do all the spells in the list. The only thing that limits you is the cost in spell points of each spell. Because remember, you have spell points. And so that's what's going to determine how many spells you do in the turn and how many spells you do in the game. So there is resource management in this game as a result of that, okay? So a lot of spells, a lot of cool tomes, really cool stuff. Then you have your equipment. Now, if you want to, you can equip your models with extra stuff. And I really recommend that once you get used to the game, because this will give you some more flavor to your models, okay? And here's more equipment. Now, one thing I want to say, some of this equipment, like these Totem of Battles, you can use them as objectives in a game. So you can say where, you know, if you win the totem, then you get a totem that's pertinent to your faction, and you get to keep that. That's your reward, right? Same thing with your opponent. You can also use like magical weapons, some of the magical weapons here, and make them the objectives, and that's what you're fighting for. The Nefsokar have become one of my favorite factions. They are a mummy faction. Okay, there's mostly mummies. You do have humans with them and creatures and stuff, but mostly mummies and golems, and they're just pretty badass. They're a very Egyptian, very inspired very much on ancient Egypt, so I like that very much. And that is it, folks. So we everything else is factions. Here is the Reptus. So for those of you that like your Lizardmen, here they are, Lizardmen, and look, they have some badass pictures of them. I really like the Reaper Lizardmen. I like their concept. And you even get like Hydras, you get Snake Men, you get like turtle people. Yeah, really cool faction. And then Revan, which is like the monster faction. There's like gnolls and orcs and all kinds of things fighting together. Very, very cool. So that is it. Once you reach the end of the book, you have an example of a game. You don't have scenarios in this book, and that's why I recommend, I mean, you're free to make any scenario. I wish they would have at least a couple of scenarios, but they don't. So basically what they do is they give you an example battle report here, and you get an idea how the game phases work and all that stuff. So you make up your own scenarios, basically, and then you have your reference card in the end. So very cool book. I really do like this game, and I do recommend this game. We are going to have a game this weekend, so you can see how the game works. If you've never heard of it, come check it out. Does this game have web support? Well, Reaper Warlord is kind of a dead game, unfortunately. But there is a lot of material on the web, you know, older forums and blogs. You do have a YouTube channel that was dedicated to Reaper Warlord that has some sample battle reports. He was very, very good. I used to watch that channel religiously. So check the description box, and I will try to put a couple of links where you can get more information on this game, okay? And of course, whatever we do here on the channel will also be a part of that web support. So web support is anything, I call it anything like Facebook groups, forums, blogs, YouTube channels, anything that covers the game online. That's what I call web support. All right, folks, well, that's all I want to say about Reaper Warlord. That concludes this MJ Game Spotlight. Check out the table that we have for this weekend, so don't go away. Check it out, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And this is an example of our Reaper Warlord table for this Saturday's game. Okay, here it is. And it's a nice looking desert. There are the Nefsakar pyramids. And this other building here. Okay, the big statues. All right, and we still have to work on our war bands a little bit. So we're probably going to do that tomorrow, Friday, kind of adjust them a little bit, and that's it. Thank you, folks. See you Saturday.